Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for staying with us until the very end and the very high point of this workshop, which is this roundtable discussion about a draft memorandum. We will try to analyze some good practices which are really recommended to each and every stakeholders in the question of the larger domain of democratic education, citizenship education, and human rights education, and the education of European values. And here, I really urge you to be very, to speak up and very active, to try to analyze and identify your strongest points, which enriched you during the debates until these 2 day sessions. And we also redacted and prepared this draft memorandum, but this is just for a starting point for reflection, which reflects the most important common points of the international organizations' recommendations, Council of Europe, OSCE, and United Nations in this field. Before we start, we have 3 wonderful commentators who kindly accepted to be our co-facilitators in the discussion of this very rich field, namely democratic and human rights education. They are also very courageous and engaged experts in this field, namely Szabolcs Virágh from the Foundation for Democratic Education, Gáspár, who was also here yesterday from the Hungarian Independent Student Parliament, and Eszter Nyúl, from an expert in education from the Education Research Doctoral School of the University of Pécs. So thank you very much for your presence. And the panel will be chaired and also closed by the remarks of Professor Péter Molnár. Thank you very much, and you are very welcome to speak up at any time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Antal and Max, and again for putting this together. I'm glad to join now, and just very shortly, I suggest that for this memorandum, when we discuss the memorandum, drafting and editing, finalizing a memorandum like this is always very significant. But I like to play with thinking in such situations that let's imagine that we are a decision-making body or an advisory board for the Council of Europe, and then so it has a lot of weight, and actually we have a lot of responsibility what's in there, because that's what will happen as common European policy. So I encourage you to think about it also that way, because if it's like, okay, we are in a discussion, then we may think that, okay, there are arguments to put this in or leave that out. We can think about it, we can discuss later, but there are situations and when there is no discussion later, when we have to decide, and so I just suggest to think about it that way, as Antal said, please engage and make suggestions about the memorandum. So at the beginning, just that, and I'm looking forward to hear the three commentators.
So I'm the first.
Yes,
I brought a very long PPT, which I didn't know I will not have time to actually say in its whole depth, but I try to choose the ones that will be more relevant now. Yeah, you introduced me as the Association for Democratic Education, but I'm wearing a different hat now, which would be a high school teacher. That's the best that describes my position here. In Nyúl High School, which actually led by the brother of Péter. So this is a connection there also. And I would like you to share. I would like you to understand best practice, which I think is a good practice, how you can actually democratize a school. It would take long to go into the details, but I would like you to see one example, which would be in an inductive way, may help you understand how you can start or how you can check whether it works or not in a high school in Hungary, given all the outside environment. Before I go on, I would like to dwell on the question, what makes a school democratic at all, which is, you know, democracy and democratic are like, is a word that can be used in many ways. And in the high school context, again, it's not really clear, not even for the students, not even for the teachers, not even for the decision makers. as if they would be interested in at all. But in our understanding in the school, at least my understanding, because I'm the one being here, it requires all these three aspects to be involved in making a school democratic. So the structure, which gives the framework for the students and the teachers to actually work in a democratic way, the pedagogical tools and ideas and mechanism, as well as the methodology that actually is in the classes and in the interaction between students and teachers. Out of all this, I'm just gonna go for one slide and try to make you imagine how the school works. It's based on a model democracy, so we kind of have these branches that we usually have in democracy that are separated and at the same time interrelated, in which students have a lot to say. At least they should have a lot to say. They not always use this chance in the way we imagine them. So we want to empower them, but they don't always need or understand why they should be empowered. Anyway, so these branches are separated. There is no one-person decision at all in the school. Of course, I can decide when I go to the bathroom, but nobody tells me when not. But generally, on the bigger level, nobody decides on their own. All the bodies, all the committees in the school at least have 2 or 3 people in them, and there is a debate all the time, a discussion which sometimes is quite long and sometimes quite slow, but we all know that this goes well with democracy. Decentralization and subsidiarity, these are buzzwords everybody likes, so I'm not going to go deep into them. Freedom and responsibility is linked, or are linked in this case. Students can take roles by election, to be group representatives for their classes, in the class that they sit, and whenever they see something that is not okay, or when they feel the need to communicate with the teachers, they can do it, and they are also elected. And to go on to another good practice is a recent thing that we started. It was started last year. We have a day called Democracy Day. Oh, how nice. In Hungarian high school, which is for democracy, and it can take many forms. Last year, the idea was that we asked the classes, what do you want to change in Kürt? And you can be creative. You can come up with anything you want that is not against the Hungarian laws and that is not against our own program that has been accepted by the Hungarian ministers and alternative curriculum, which is fine enough. And then we asked these opinions. All the classes, or not all the classes, but those that were interested, gave their opinion. And then on the day itself, all the classes, again, all the students were asked which one of these options, which one of these recommendations do you want to vote on? And then came one, and again there was a voting, which was secret. This is important, so nobody could know, nobody could influence what they would choose. And so there was a campaign before, so there was a chance for the classes to actually go and choose this. This was done, and then the whole class, the whole school voted whether this should actually go or not. So this should actually be accepted or not. And it was accepted, and I tried to just sum it up a bit. So practically students have now the chance in Kürt to opt out from lessons if they provide a project program, let's say for the whole year, which is in comparison with the amount of lessons they miss. They still need to get a grade, or they need to get an end-of-year exam of some sort, so they need to have a grade in their, whatever it's called, diploma or degree, but they don't have to go to lessons in the school. So they can work on their own projects, which can be from writing a novel to making a movie, and there are very, very good ideas. And what is important for us here, that this whole idea, we just gave the framework. We, the adults, just gave the framework, and then we said, okay, this could work if you're gonna be in it, students. It's not gonna be that you're gonna wait for us to work on it. So there was a working group of students who were interested enough, and I don't know how many of us adults, There were altogether 12 people, about 5 meetings, 2 months to find the detailed version of the system, because it's not an easy system to be applied right on the start. This took about 2 months. Then we had to accept it by the teachers community, which was not an easy job. It didn't go through for the first time, but then we argued more and more and more, and the debate ended with the result. Many people were skeptic. Those people now are actually happy and enthusiastic, because as a practice goes, at the moment, it's just going now. It started in October. There are only 12 students who use this chance, which seem to be really a low number if you see altogether there are 380 people. But how to say, so that was not an easy thing to just, okay, I just want to opt out from math and I'm gonna draw a nice thing on the board in June. You had to choose a mentor, you had to write a motivational letter, so there was much work already included. So there are 12 students, they all gave in their projects. We, the committees, in which there were always students, at least one, had to decide whether it's okay, or we had to, ask them to rewrite it, and then all of them were accepted now, and these are on, and these are just absolutely great projects, I can tell you, and we'll just wait for the end result, which would be a product actually, or like a program that can be shared with the school. And I can answer your questions later on, but this was the main important thing I wanted to share with you.
Thank you so much, Szabolcs. Gáspár, the floor is yours.
I have a PPT. We like to be visual as well in the student program, so. Okay, so welcome everyone today, and thank you for sticking with us throughout this conference. And it's been a pleasure to be here and represent the student parliament, and I can speak for my fellow colleagues who unfortunately cannot be here. So I want to give like a very short overview of what we do, and some of the things we already mentioned, so there are no spoilers anymore, I'm sorry. But definitely I will highlight and kind of synthesize a few key points we made, and kind of try to collect what we've been through throughout these 2 days. So, what is the overview of Hungarian student rights? Well, there are fundamental rights we all have, even as students, and these are secured by laws. And I would say, at least by law, we are pretty secure in our rights. It's defined what we can do and what we cannot do, even in a school system. However, there are several problematic parts of the law, and a lot of them are detached from reality, and some just cannot be really enforced, or the students can't really live by these rights because there's no logistical background to it, and some laws are even completely missing or are faulty. So the whole legal framework in Hungary is not very student-oriented. There are no legal remedies you can turn to. It's very bureaucratic for a young person to actually get any legal remedy, or to have any kind of outside person from their school system to help them in certain ways. And the democratic capability of students is low, and we've seen the graphs, we've seen the statistics. It's a given thing, and we think that it was mentioned yesterday that people are not born democratic. Well, I would disagree. I think everybody is born a democrat. Everybody is born a person who appreciates freedom, but this freedom is taken away from them. It's indoctrinated into them over the 12 years in the Prussian school system, that they don't have rights, they don't have individuality, they cannot have creativity. They're just a brick in the wall, which was, of course, already thematized by Pink Floyd. And we actually put that song on a protest once. It was very successful. So what we're trying to say is that this 12 years throughout the Prussian education system, we become kind of indoctrinated in a way, and that's why later people just don't go to vote. And if they vote, well, sometimes you wish they didn't, because they vote for certain parties. They are much more prone to manipulation by demagogue messages or by demagogue parties, extremism. And I think this is a very, very, very huge problem. And if you think about what the Prussian system is, the Prussian system was invented by the Prussians for the very reason to teach children the basics of mathematics, literature, so they can count potatoes or do like more effective agricultural work. But the big problem for them was if they become too smart, they would challenge the neo-absolutist power of the Prussian monarchy. So they needed to kind of save the authoritarian viewpoint of the structure of society, which was before that organized by the church. And this kind of authoritarian viewpoint was implemented into the Prussian system. And although a lot of countries have kind of upgraded the Prussian system or changed it, still it's very much the same in Eastern Europe. Thus we have a problem of education in Eastern Europe. And what the Orban regime did now is that it turned the education system from a bug to a feature. They went back to the very roots of our education system. They embraced the Prussian model of basically authoritarian viewpoint in education, and they reinforced those kind of tendencies. That's why they, for example, destroyed the Ministry of Education itself first. They bled out public schools in a way that they cut funding. They established, for example, viceroys or chancellors on the universities that control everything. They also introduced the clique, the infamous clique, which is like a central organizing body for different school districts. And so schools can't even buy toilet paper on their own without any kind of support from the centralized education committee. So these things are all and of course the curriculum became a lot more dense. They abolished any kind of creative thinking in a way. They introduced even more material to learn, so kids don't even have time for their own. One of our parliamentarians actually calculated that a person in school has 27 minutes outside of school time to do anything else but to school and have a shower and like basic stuff like that. So this is what the system is aimed towards. And now it's very much, before that it was just the status quo, which most parties accepted, like that's how it is, because there was no regime change after 1989 in education. So most parties just accepted it, and now it's become a feature, a central feature of the Orban regime. And of course, destroying this institution itself, which was actually my university last year, is very much part of that as well, since it's one of the last remaining free institutions in Hungary. So yes, to follow up on that, I would have a video, but I won't show it because I talk too much. So I will go to the low part. There are some examples I brought which kind of highlight why there's a problem of democracy in education. For example, there's a school board in Hungary, but the school board actually consists of the student council, the parents council, and the teachers. However, the school board is optional. You don't have to have a school board in the schools. And if the law says if you don't have a school board, you have instead a committee, like an ad hoc committee. And surprise, who's not in the ad hoc committee? Students. Like it has parents, it has teachers, and it has no students. So what actually happens, of course, is that most schools don't have a school board. And then if there's a problem, and if anybody happens to actually read the regulations, they find that they're not even represented. So, I mean, that doesn't really help with the legal remedy, does it? So, schools also provide little incentive for student councils. That's also true. Well, now we're in the age of third generation human rights, which means that the government, would have to encourage more proactively student involvement, and it doesn't really do that. There's usually not enough funding, there's usually not enough support, no any kind of training, so that's also a problem. And student councils only have a right of opinion. That means they don't have to be taken into account at all, even if they actually listen to their opinions, because usually they don't. So there is no real relief. But even if somebody turns to a court, there is no real relief. There's nothing you can do. There was a teacher last week who was sentenced because he was systematically abusing students of a very young age, and he got only 1 year suspension of his teaching license, which means he will probably go back to school, since there are not enough teachers. He will go back to school. Another one is that somebody actually went all the way to the ombudsman, because a teacher was beating up a kid, and the parents went to the principal, and the principal fired the kid. they exposed the kid for reporting an abuse. And the ombudsman said, well, that's too bad. You shouldn't do that. That was it. There was no any kind of conclusion for the principal. So if you go all the way through, you spend the months, the money, whatever it is, there's no real remedy. And that makes people feel vulnerable, it makes people feel exposed, and no wonder they are not taking any legal action for any kind of abuse, mental, sexual, physical. And the oppression is also multidimensional, since it's both by the law and the government, the central planning of the government, but it's the institutions themselves that sometimes reinforce these kind of ideas. They are sometimes very okay with having this kind of oppressive system. Some people, we have to say that some teachers are just not fit to teach, and some teachers are really dictatorial in the way they abuse their rights. And although this doesn't represent most of the community, this is something that has to be said and something that has to be dealt with, both by the teachers themselves, the teacher NGOs, the communities, whatever, and it has to be government regulation as well. So what are our best practices in the student parliament? Some are planned, some are already here. One is, you're not alone. We're trying to teach students that they're not alone. There is a community, there is someone, the student parliament, who can help them by supporting them with thoughts, legal advice, whatever, but also having a collective of basically a supportive environment and atmosphere. One is, there is an organization. We collect opinions, we synthesize it into different recommendations, and we amplify it with our several initiatives. And we do pressure for legislative change, and we already submitted a lot of legislative text. We pressure for media representation, to have more representation, and our generation should be represented by just celebrity stars in Big Brother. Also, we pressure political parties to incorporate our opinions more, because now, for example, democratic education is non-existent in any kind of party program. And of course, pressure on societal recognition as a whole, to kind of reinforce the idea that somebody should be judged not on their age, but based on their merit and their arguments. So we collect opinions from our voters. We have more than 5,000 voters. We have a Facebook page that has the most reach in Hungary, about 17,000 followers. We have posts that reach more than 1 million people in the country, and this is done basically with no added boost, so this is the free reach. And we have different committees that collect by the voters different information. We synthesize it and vote on these legislative proposals, and then we amplify it, sometimes in protest, such as the CU protest, which we co-organized to defend this university, and that was the biggest protest since 1989, and over 80,000 people showed up. And yeah, that's actually me, but I'm not the only one who speaks at protest. So we have different plans for the future. Yeah, it's the conclusions, yes. We have different plans for the future, different projects, and we're always trying to be dynamic. We're trying to put our message in a context that is also intriguing for the media, for the politicians, for the students. It's something very difficult because different people want different things, but we're trying to get the message across, sometimes in different channels. So one is Diák Fest. It's the first student festival about politics in Hungary. It was organized last year with over 30 NGOs, 50 or like 40 musical performers, and lots and lots of students. There were musical channels, artistic channels, and there were also different panels and conferences which were co-organized so that people had fun but also had a lot of input from society. And it was a huge success. We have the CPR, which is to introduce mandatory CPR training in schools, because the government wants to reduce shooting ranges into schools, and they already spent way too much money on that. And we said, instead of death, we want actually life. And this life would be that actually legislatively, it's mandatory for schools to teach CPR, but they don't, because there's no money for that. So we want that money to be spent on that. We want to put pressure on the government, have like a huge societal gathering to put pressure on the government to actually achieve what they wrote in their laws. We're going to launch an anonymous forum where students can actually send in different evidence of abuse, such as videos or sound recordings, because we think that until the legislation changes, until the whole perception changes, the only weapon that kids have against abuse is evidence, because nobody else would believe them. And if 30 people have smartphones in a class, nobody would know who recorded it. And that's something that will stop abuse in its tracks, because nobody will know who recorded that message or video or whatever it is. And this will cause a shift in society. So we're trying to find partners for that, support from even the police forces and different stakeholders. So of course everybody's very welcome to join in any kind of initiative. And we want to have a two-chamber parliament, which would include university students as well, since the official university representation is not doing anything either. Sadly, the Hungarian student parliament is the only representation of students in Hungary, which is not basically influenced by the government, since the official student parliament and the official student council of university students are non-existent basically. They don't have any kind of resolutions that support student rights. The official student parliament only is in session every 2 years, and it's behind closed doors, and they censor the material they put out, and they also shut down your microphone if you talk too much in a critical fashion. Now we want to be involved further in the official parliament's activities. We want to be in committees, we want to voice your opinion in the rural parliament as well. We want the voice of the youth to be heard, and that's something I think most people can stand behind. And we want to have additional funding to have more projects, commercials, and to expand our reach. So that would be, in a nutshell, the student parliament, and I'm sorry if I extended the time a bit. I welcome any questions and, of course, any kind of support, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. And the last speaker, Eszter Nyúl from the University of Pécs, translated by myself, so the floor is yours.
Sok szeretettel üdvözlök mindenkit, az angol hangom most Anti lesz.
I am glad to greet you. My name is Antal Berkes.
Amikor megkaptam ezt a felkérést, hogy jöjjek el és beszéljek itt ezen a workshopon, keresgéltem a szerepet, hogy honnan kapom a megszólítást. Ugye egyetemen kutató vagyok, állampolgárságra nevelési kutatási területen.
When I was asked to speak in this workshop officially, I was searching for my role. What is my role? Do I have to speak here as a researcher, as a Hungarian citizen? And I was thinking about it.
Mégis nekem azért vannak más szerepeim. Nézzük csak, jogász vagyok, politológus vagyok. Ez azt jelenti, hogy azok közé tartozom, akik az egyetemen gyakorlatilag megtanulják azt, amiről szeretnénk, hogy a többiek is ismerjék, és tudják, és alkalmazzák.
Nevertheless, as a lawyer, as a political scientist, I have further roles, and my main domain is in this role is to diffuse information for my fellows.
Emellett cserkészvezető is vagyok, tehát azt jelenti, hogy 26 éve önkéntes munkát végzek a fiatalok körében.
Besides, I am also a scout leader, and for 26 years I have been volunteering.
És emellett ugye ott vannak a különböző munkatapasztalataim, így például voltam már önkormányzatnál esélyegyenlőségi referens, találkoztam egyedi esetekkel.
Besides, I have been working also, so I have plenty of working experience. I worked also for a municipality as equality of chances officer, and where I met lots of individual cases.
Mondhatnánk azt, hogy mind a három szerep, amit az előbb említettem, a szakértői véleményt is adhatnak.
Let's say all these three kinds of roles could give an expert's view.
Minden esetre azt gondolom erről a háromról azóta, hogy kutatói munkát végzek, hogy mind a három igen szubjektív.
Nevertheless, I think on each of those three roles that each of them are very subjective.
Amiben nagyon sokat segített számomra a kutatói munka, a fegyelmezettség, abban, hogy kutatással alátámasztott eredményekkel vizsgáljam a tényeket, és ok-okozati viszonyokat keressek.
Nevertheless, as a researcher, I see my main achievement in the discipline, so that I could analyze and find research results in a disciplined manner, so that to diffuse it among the wider public.
Van egy nagyon kedves professzor úr, Németh András, innen az RT-ről, aki a Platon barlang hasonlatával szokta jellemezni ezt a helyzetet. Nem biztos, hogy népszerű leszek azzal, amit én most itt el szeretnék mondani.
As one of my former teachers, Professor András Németh told often, there is a very, very famous example or hypothesis of Platon about the cave. It is the cave example. It is not necessarily popular among students here.
Tehát ha kiindulunk abból, hogy demokratikus állampolgárságra nevelésről beszélünk, emberi jogoknyi oktatásról beszélünk, akkor milyen problémakört vizsgálunk?
If we leave from the starting point that we examine citizenship education, human rights education, what kind of questions do we examine?
Azt hiszem, hogy abban megegyezhetünk, hogy ez egy tanulhatóság és taníthatóság kérdéskör.
This is a question of how to learn and how to teach it.
Ebben az esetben pedagógiai válaszokat adunk rá, vagy várunk rá.
In this case, we give pedagogical answers or we expect pedagogical answers.
Ennek ellenére legtöbbször jogi, vagy gazdasági, esetleg politikai válaszok hangzanak el.
Nevertheless, at the same time, mostly we got legal, economic and political answers.
Pedig maradhatnánk a neveléstudománynak a területén.
Whereas we could stay in the domain of education research.
Azt gondolom, hogy a civil szervezetekkel is, és mindjárt erre akkor bővebben kitérnek, az igazán gyümölcsöző együttműködés az lenne, hogyha közös kutatások, közös publikálások során az oktatáspolitikában közös aktorrá lehetne válni.
The best way would be if we could become, in cooperation with the civilian societies, a common research and common publication actors.
Az állampolgárságra nevelés, nem tudom, hogy ezt angolul milyen hasonlattal szokták illetni, ez a két pad között a földre esik.
This citizenship education is often made analog to a thing which falls between two banks on soil.
Mi ez a kettő pad? Az egyik az oktatáspolitika, a másik az ifjúságpolitika.
These two banks are two different policies, namely education policy and youth policy.
Akkor nézzük, ott van a közoktatás, a NAT-ról úgy tudom, hogy már előző nap ugye volt szó, és nézzük a másik oldalt, a NIST, a Nemzeti Ifjúsági Stratégiát, és ehhez kapcsoljuk akkor a civil szervezeteket.
We can mention three domains: the public education and namely policy, and namely the framework for public education. It's a framework policy and the national youth strategy.
Mi az én dilemmám ebben? Nyilván az, hogy nem lesz szabad ezt mondanom, hogy nyilván, tehát hogy az én problémám, ez, hogy hányan részesülnek által a kompetencia fejlesztésben.
My big dilemma, my problem is that how many of the youth benefit from the competence development.
De mit értünk kompetencia alatt?
What do we understand under competence development?
Ugye tudásról, készségről, képességről, és a harmadik az attitűd, amiről beszélünk.
We understand under it three different domains: the knowledge, competences and attitudes.
Ha a tudásról beszélünk, akkor ez az ész, a szellem, hogy tudom, mit kell csinálni.
This, if we speak about knowledge, this is the spirit. This is the theoretical knowledge that we know what to do.
Tehát tudom, mit kell csinálni, és képesség, ez a meg tudom csinálni.
Knowledge is I know what to do, whereas capabilities, capacities, competencies are I can do something.
Az attitűd, az a lélek, a hozzáállás, az a meg akarom csinálni.
Whereas the attitude is about the spirit, about or heart, that I would like to do something, I want to do something.
Hogyha ehhez mondjuk ilyen ikonokat rakunk hozzá, akkor az egyik az ész lenne, a másik a kéz, a harmadik a szív.
If we put icons to these three domains, we find the reason, yeah, the heart and my brains.
Azt lehet mondani, hogy ezeknek a fejlesztése mindig az egyénnek fontos, és a hasznára válik.
The development of these practices is always for the sake of and the interest of the individual.
Ez az egót szolgálja, mitől lesz ettől valaki cselekvő, aktív állampolgár.
This serves the individual, my ego, and in this sense I become an active citizen.
Az eddigi tanulmányaim alapján azt mondhatom, hogy egy negyedik dolog épül rá, az pedig a mások szolgálata.
On the basis of my former researches and studies, I can see that the fourth element is the service of others.
Az elején úgy képzeltem mindig a kompetenciát, mint egy létrát, aminek fokjai vannak, amin halad az ember.
At the very beginning, I imagined the competence, the capabilities as a kind of scale which has many degrees.
Az érthető is, jogász vagyok, én a tudást raktam első helyre.
Of course, as a lawyer, I put the knowledge in the first place.
Ezen indulok el, megalapozott tudásra építkezem.
I depart from this point. I construct everything on the basis of that knowledge.
De szerencsére megkaptam másoktól a visszajelzést, ami elgondolkodtatott azon, hogy ez sokkal inkább egy háromlábú szék.
Luckily, as in exchange with others, I got the output that it is rather a chair with three legs.
Ezeknek együtt kell fejlődniük ahhoz, hogy egyensúlyban legyen, és egyik se legyen vicegő lába.
They have to develop together with each other so that this chair should not be a kind of unbalanced.
De ha már ennél a képnél maradunk, akkor ez a három láb, amit említettem, a tudás, készség, képesség, attitűd, és ezen maga, amin ülünk, ez a szolgálat.
However, if we put together the knowledge, the capabilities and the attitudes, we see that the fourth element, the service of others, could be the point where we sit on the chair.
Én hiszek abban, hogy a nemzeti alaptanterv és a nemzeti ifjúsági stratégiát valahogy össze lehet hozni. És hogyha így nézzük, akkor a három láb a NAT, és erre épül a NIS.
I believe that the framework, the national framework policy of education and the national youth strategies could be reconciled as these three chairs and the chair.
Ahhoz, hogy én a vizsgálódásokban azt terült ki számomra, hogy az oktatáspolitika aktorai között Magyarországon nem szerepelnek a civil szervezetek.
It seems to me on the basis of my studies that in Hungary, in the actors of education policies, the NGOs, the civil societies are not present.
Ugye szemben a nemzetközi szervezetekkel, a közigazgatással, a tanárok, diákok, szülők.
That's notwithstanding to the presence of international organizations, teachers and students associations.
Viszont úgy gondolom, hogy egy ilyen együttműködés alkalmassá tenni a civil szervezeteket is arra, hogy aktorként megjelenjenek az oktatáspolitikában.
However, such a cooperation would make civil societies able to be present and able to be present and active in the education policies.
Úgyhogy én a magam részéről lelkesen várom az együttműködéseket, és nagyon szépen köszönöm.
From my side, I am very open and I expect such cooperations, and thank you very much for your attention.
So I thank all three speakers also for the nice presentations, and just very quickly one comment, especially on Szabolcs and Gáspár, that I was at one of the democracy days that Szabolcs mentioned. It was really nice. With my brother, we were in a classroom, there was a discussion, it was good discussion on so-called hate speech, but unfortunately I realized only at the end that there were few people who were active in the discussion and the others were listening. So I wished that at the beginning I would have started to ask people in the room to go around, not to pressure people, just to include those, have the voice of those as well who otherwise may remain silent. And how it's connected to what Gáspár said about the Russian school, which is unfortunately sort of kind of a tradition or part of a tradition, that in Hungarian, the Hungarian word, correct me if I'm mistaken if it is another word, but at least the one word for university student is hallgató, which in English means listener. So it's about like the student is there to listen the source of wisdom, and that's it in a way. And so with that, I just want to mention the importance of vocabulary and tradition. And I will suggest more specifically also to try to somehow insert them very, very shortly in the memorandum. Somehow we need to work on vocabulary because seemingly we speak the language, but in fact language speaks us. So if we have the words which highlight or represent traditions which sort of like not necessarily supportive of individual freedom, the freedom of individuals in community, then we are in such a disadvantage, very hard to deal with. And so, yeah, that's basically what I wanted to add at this point. And I think claiming tradition is also very important. And let's not be pessimistic about our traditions. So let's think that, let's not just take it for granted that, oh, yes, it's important, but unfortunately in some of our countries traditions are suppressive, so what can we do about it? No, we can search for examples, for positive examples, and highlight those examples and build on them and claim that tradition supports the kind of education and democracy and freedom in education we are talking about.
Thank you so much. And now I give the floor to you, to everybody. I just, we can start some overall comments or any questions to the speakers or any new ideas. I just have one request to try to analyze or identify one point to which your, in the draft document, to which your comment or question is the mostly related. So, or a new point that you would like to add or see in the draft document. So the floor is now yours. Please speak up. Any ideas, comments, questions, remarks are very, very welcome. Please, Ilya.
Thank you. I appreciate that during this last remarks we reintroduced the topic of pedagogical type of proposals. In fact, I think it emerged yesterday, and it was my opinion that this memorandum missed a part about the necessity to review teaching methods in a way to convey the idea that education and schools are well, embody democracy in every moment of students' life. And so, in my opinion, the need to spread democratic education, not in any specific course, but indeed also through the experience is very important. So, thank you for remarking that, and indeed I would like to be introduced in the memorandum. And a question related to that project of Democracy Day that was mentioned. I am wondering if it is a good or if it can be considered a good thing in the end to allow students to kind of opt out of a compulsory activity that should be designed by a ministry to endow students with some skills, and if allowing them to opt out is not instead harmful, as it deprives the state, which should theoretically work, of a tool of control, and because my point is, if we insist on the possibility for NGOs or private initiatives to complement education and with other tools, maybe what we lose is like any say or concrete opportunity to ensure that the result is obtained, if you know what I mean. Like, I would see the final goal, like our final objective should be to convince and persuade formal educational institutions to act, as the democratic countries in which we live have institutions that should take care of this. And if we originally do not believe that they can make it now or in the future, I don't think we can really have a long run success.
Thank you. Any comments from your side? Yes, please.
So you say that it might be harmful for the students to opt out from lessons. Well, I totally disagree, because I think the idea that you have a student there aged, whatever, 18, and he or she had spent all his or her life in an institution where she or he, or let's say she, had no say in whatever way regarding what, how, and when she spends there. So her whole life, which means in the present case 35 lessons a week, is designed and structured by people with whom she has no access to, or she has no say in whatever. And we believe that somebody up there in the Ministry of Education knows better what she needs to learn, what she will use in her life in 10 years' time or in 20 years' time, which I think is totally an obsolete way to think in the world of, even now, in the world of internet and Google, not because it can substitute the teaching, one-to-one teaching, or the teaching that is there in the classroom, but because knowledge is much more and it's much wider, in my understanding, than what you get in the school. So if a student of, 18 years has something like a mania that gives her real inner motivation to use her time, how come that I can say, no, it's not important. It's much more important for you to study biology, which you will not take an exam, actually, even if you do, I would say the same, but you will not take an exam. You can easily get a grade of 2. Who cares what your grade is really? Do we really mean that whatever is in the textbooks, each and every word is that important that each and every human in Hungary should, or whichever place we're speaking about, should know it? Because I think this is, it's one way it's idealism, and the other way it's just simply not true for me. So what I believe in is actually what democratic education for me means, and there's actually a movement that is called democratic education, and they have 2 basic standpoints. One is that classroom attendance is optional. The people themselves can choose either from a list or from their own what and when and how they want to learn and study. And the other part is that the decision making is shared. And if these 2 principles are met and used, that's when you can really call democratic education. It's not democratic education if I make you stay in a classroom for whole day, it's actually whole week, and then I give you homework that you need to do because it's so very important. All the teachers say that their subject is the most important, so you need to spend some time at home, and then you come and you give me an over report or whatever, just because the érettségi, so the final graduation in Hungary, says that it is important. So I could go on forever, but I'm just going to stop myself right there. And I didn't mean that so your question is irrelevant or bad. I'm just trying to be really provocative in this sense, to redefine our understanding of democratic education.
I'm not sure I fully agree, because not because of my personal experience, because I participated in groups at school, but that was done in my free time, and well, I totally agree that one should be allowed to have more initiatives, to have a personalized curriculum, but if we put an obligation together with a right, and we assume that the Ministry of Education of a country works, which we saw is not always true, but if we assume it works, who bears responsibility if a student opts out of a necessary input that was found out, for example, some math class, or in a knowledge society, the basic capacity to learn how to use technology. So what happens and who pays for these things that happen?
Yeah, please.
Now I understand. So we suppose that if you're there in the classroom and you sit there, it means you learn. That is not true. Mm-hmm. Many people at the same time now, as we speak, no, because it's the weekend, but anyway, they sit there, they be there in their bodies, but they don't learn. They are somewhere else, or they pretend that they are there. This is one thing. And also in our system, maybe it wasn't clear, you need to get a grade, you need to get an end result of some sort, but you don't need to necessarily be in the class. So we say that being in the class all the time is not necessarily connected to your performance at the end. And also the graduation, the exam, the big exam everybody's so afraid of when she's 16, we can view it as an expectation, an output. So that's what you need to know. Who cares how you know it? Who cares if you learn it from the internet or you hear it from your brother or you don't do anything for 11 years but the last year you need to get this paper so you quickly learn it. So our responsibility lies in the fact of not letting people opt out, those people who we don't believe they could really use their time responsibly and free their freedom. And what was the other? Yes, that's our main responsibility, that we make sure that their decision is okay and we as a school will not meet results that we don't want to. And that's why just, one more thing, there are milestones built in the system. So these committees don't just give you the permission to do it for 1 year, but you have a quarter year, let's say meeting, we've just had them, a half a year meeting, and plus but one for the last meeting in the year, so that we see, are you really doing your project or are you just wasting your time, which is actually fine for me too, but anyway, in the system it's not okay. So you have a mentor and who doesn't know the thing better than you, but he's just an adult, so he can help you structure your thoughts and give priorities to what you're actually working on. But who am I to say that what you're working on is not important? So that's my basic principle regarding this.
And do you still have to sit the examination of that class that you didn't attend? Okay, so...
No, actually it depends. If it's a compulsory graduation subject, you will of course need to do the graduation subject if you're in your last years of your studies. If it's biology, which is not a compulsory subject, you can have your own discussion with the teacher, who might say, oh, let's just do a wonderful PPT about the life of, life of whoever, animals or whatever.
Okay, so still a
the mammals.
topic.
And it depends on your agreement with the teacher, and we suppose that the teacher is wise enough to give you criteria that you can actually meet, and that it actually requires some type of work, something that you think is important, not because of the érettségi, because you don't need to do that from that subject. So this is what is important.
So if we connect back to our official, the draft memorandum, this right to participate, or students' right to participate in decision making, how would you phrase the limit? What is the limit? Is it decision making at all levels? Decision making in the decisions that affect the students, or decision making just in the optional courses, or decision making as far as my basic educational needs are guaranteed? So would you put a limit to it? It's an open question to everybody. Max is here also willing to edit it or add any new phrase or delete anything that you consider. Please. Yeah.
Can I ask a question from Szabolcs? Yeah. That your school is obviously, I think that's a gymnasium, so secondary grammar school.
Yes.
So could you imagine this system in a vocational or technical school? Because one of my problems all the time, that I think I understand most of us are other students or absolvents, or graduates from grammar schools. Okay, and sometimes we neglect that there are also pupils and students and with other backgrounds. Okay, because it's of course obviously very. I fully subscribe to what you say. We have it also in Slovakia. We have it in our educational law, that the parents have the right to offer their students, their pupils, individual education, even fully individual. Okay, so that you don't go even to school at all. Okay, this is one, but it's very difficult to imagine it like with a pupil in a vocational technical school, and it's the majority of students. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it is a grammar school in its name, and of course it's a private school. You have people who have some money, which is more than the average Hungarians, but in all the measurements, all these all country, what do you call them in English, these competence measurements, on the list we are under a general vocational school. So regarding skills and competences, it's really the average people, but of course in their money background. So this might give you an idea. So it's not really it's not an elite school. It's not Radnóti. It's not Prefort. It's not, you know, you're the best school in Hungary. And I totally can imagine. And actually there is another way of this formed for those kids who are out from the system already because they couldn't accommodate themselves to it. That's why we have these, what do you call them, is second chance schools, zöld kakas, and where you actually have this system, maybe not legally, but you do have, because you can't make them sit there. You can't just simply make them sit in the lesson. So you need to have a stronger mentoring, or one-to-one sessions. You need to make their individual learning plans. They need to negotiate which subject is important for you, it might be important for you. So it's closer to being a social worker, I guess, working there, as the teacher who goes out and says the wisdom for the kids who are eager to learn them, and like as a sponge would suck up them. I mean the knowledge, not the teacher, sorry. So I actually can imagine that this works in both sides of this scale that you mean.
Any other remark or question on this point, or any comment? If not, then we can even proceed. Yeah, do you have anything? No? Then we can even proceed point by point. Whether you have any thoughts or comments or additions to the points that we redacted. We found some policies and practices in the common international framework and recommendations on education at all levels, which should be respected. And the following principles we found, for example, that empowerment should be respected. So I just read the text. Thanks to human rights, democratic citizenship, European values education, students should understand the importance of being actively engaged with public efforts and human protection in particular. Do you have any remarks, comments, or criticism to that one? Yeah, Gáspár, please.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, of course, I agree. I think in the end, when there is this list, like public affairs, elections, etc., there should be, I think, representation included, because as being not just because being participating in an election or petition, knowledge about these things as a third person is one thing, but to have knowledge about yourself running for office, even in a student parliament or just a local council, I think is just as important. So the word representation, I think, might be added if people agree.
Also, when you say they should receive a skill set, for me it creates the effect that there's somebody who can give you the skill set and you can receive, which is just the opposite that we're working on.
Yeah.
So it's actually, you might say they should receive and then practice on a daily basis in their own school life, in their own life, right there, because that doesn't work any other way.
Sure. Even linguistically, it's the empowerment. It's not only passive way, but also an active empowerment. So something like.
I do agree, but I kind of felt the same. But I thought that in the participation in decision making implementation, I thought that was the part which kind of reflects on your point.
But it's both. It can be there also.
Oh yeah, it has
can
to be
present both.
Yeah.
So
maybe it could be that with the participation of the students, a skill set should be developed, or something like that, to bring that part in. And I would suggest to include a skill set, including supported vocabulary. It may not be necessary, but I just raise it for consideration that
Probably supportive, yeah.
Including a supported vocabulary after a skill set.
Any other ideas to this empowerment? Or yeah, please, Andrea.
I'm not necessarily. I mean, it might be included in empowerment part, or it might be a different point that public policy regarding human rights education should be based on data and evidence. So this will make the argument stronger and more valid, and whenever there will be questions from policymakers or stakeholders regarding the necessity of having human rights education, we can always say, because we have evidence on our project, or our argument is based on data. So
is it the point on participation in decision making, or because maybe there might be a better point for policy making? And
yeah, maybe. I mean,
I would say it's best to put it before actually those other points. So the policies and practices at all levels should be based on data and evidence, or constructed on the basis of data and evidence, and then that they should respect the principles. Because it's very reaching.
yes. Okay. Any other comment?
I have a comment to this point, but also to the overall structure that I'm missing two things. So I'm missing a point on the role of the teacher, because I think it's completely missing. So we should input something on the role of the teacher. Maybe also in this point, because it is about empowerment of students, but it should also be about the empowerment of teachers, because the teacher's role is very important, and especially in the democratic and human rights education. So I cannot imagine. So I can imagine doing that thing that Szabolcs mentioned in almost all subjects, but not in education, so democracy and human rights. I definitely cannot imagine it without teacher. Yeah, and the other thing is that you speak here, you are emphasizing very much the role of the non-formal education, but we are missing the role of the formal education, because I think that's the most important, and I think that it won't fly without a curricular reform. With a curricular reform, you cannot simply introduce concise and meaningful education to democracy and human rights into our system, into our Russian schools. Okay.
I also have a general question, which might have been discussed already. Who are we actually trying to send message to with this?
Yeah, that's the third point that I was.
Then it depends on what, for example, what you're saying is absolutely right. But if we take it as the basis, what we have is the formal education, and nobody else, or really rarely use non-formal education. This is how they understand it. So we take it for granted that normally this is what goes on in schools, and that would be important to involve other non-formal education processes. But of course, we need non-formal education processes too.
Who we are addressing?
Yeah, it's a good open question. So please.
I actually think that my remark about the need to push for more participative teaching methods can fit in the empowerment bullet point, so that it works as an example that people can discuss even about what is considered to be the truth, so during a class, etc. So I see it as part of people's empowerment, because it teaches them how to always be reactive and critical of things. I don't know what you think.
Any ideas or comments on that?
I think that essentially the spirit of non-formal education is based on participation in particular. So maybe there, but how exactly would you phrase then? So where would you put the phrase, and how exactly would you phrase it there?
In empowerment, you mean?
Well, you can put it where you prefer, but so we would need some exact phrase. So for instance, like participative, or forms of teaching, then maybe it could even be connected with the role of the teachers we do not have here. We could create a new bullet point for the role of the teachers, where we could mention that participative forms of teaching should be in place for in all kinds of schools.
Yeah, maybe it fits better in the role of teachers. So can we discuss about it later?
Yeah, I agree that formal, but Kalman raised that somehow we should push it that formal education should also strongly back these efforts. Somehow we should find a way to put it in. And in non-formal education, I suggest to mention participatory art, perhaps also because non-formal, just also as an example to make it a bit more clear what it means. So the wording, I would suggest it may be a bit long, but non-formal education, including self-reflective artistic activities such as participatory theater, maybe forum theater and slam poetry. So I think it would be good to mention these because such self-reflective artistic activities participatory artistic activities can bring students and teachers and basically I believe everybody to understandings that other forms of communication cannot do.
And maybe also at this point we could add that it's very important for the teachers to be taught of how to employ these non-formal education methods. Not to just tick them, that they know them without having applied them before in a special course.
Alina?
Yeah, I have some point. If we talk about teacher, we have to use the words educators also, because teacher is in formal education and in informal we use educators. So it's one point. If we talk about teaching methods and teaching forms, yeah, in half it's really good space how to improve democracy and citizenship and identity, but the second half is environment, and only methods and form doesn't work nothing. The teaching democracy is not about teaching in the room. It's about whole school approach, it's about democratic environment, it's maybe about school trip, it's about school governancy. It's not only about teaching method and forms. So I would like to underline this.
And where? In which point? In the
it wasn't to the memorandum, but it's reaction to another from this group who talk about teaching forms.
Forms and methodology.
Yeah, because it's not only about teaching forms, it's about democracy environment in schools.
Yeah, but that's the last but one point, the democratic environment.
Yeah.
So that it just needs to reformulate the title of the point, democratic environment.
And the third point is not only environment, school environment, but the community environment, when the school is only one part of the closer community. Yeah.
Gáspár?
Yes. Well, to the non-formal education part, it's kind of vague that what do we understand by non-formal education? I mean, it might be more clear to those involved, but to those reading this memorandum, it might not be clear what it means. So either there should be like some kind of definition included, or at least some reference to a definition, because I mean, I can think of many ways which is non-formal education. Is it outside of school, inside of school? Because, for example, if it's inside of school, and I'm not sure artistic form would be the first thing I would add, or at least in the word order. I think if non-formal education, because in Hungary, there are different levels of formal education. Probably in the Western world, for example, being formal is already liberal here. So we have to really add the context to what are we talking about, because, for example, even like a project-based working would be non-formal education in Hungary. And if that would be something that we obviously want to introduce, I think that comes before any kind of artistic activity, although I do recognize the importance of artistic activities, and I do believe that it's something that drives democracy forward. Also, another point I wanted to make was that in the participation, decision making, and implementation, it says that consultation with key stakeholders, including civil organization, expert teachers, and with the direct and meaningful participation of youth. This is a small thing that I think youth should be the first in the word order, and then all the others should be afterwards, since the most directly affected part of education, or people of education, is the students. Therefore, I think they have the order to come first in this. Also, what their role should be, like what the independent student bodies or stakeholder bodies, what kind of role should they have? It says that they should be granted an advisory and monitoring role. I find it a bit weak because they already have that in a lot of cases, but that doesn't guarantee them any kind of remedies. So, I mean, this is up to debate whether different bodies in society or legislation, how much power do they want. It, of course, ranges from no power at all to a veto power when it comes to education. I think that's up to debate, but definitely I think we should work out some kind of they should have at least some kind of role that is empowering. So at least in the first round, they could, for example, veto a certain bill, and maybe in the second round, and they could be able to send it back to legislative bodies, and then it would be accepted maybe in the second round. So they wouldn't have like a veto power per se, but anyway, a stronger mandate is required for these kind of advisory bodies, because currently they have like some kind of consultation power, and it doesn't matter at all. And one more thing, which is missing, I don't know where this should be integrated, but what kind of legal remedies different stakeholders have, especially students. Maybe in democracy and educational institutions, in that part it says that it's imperative for schools to be in institutions to be engaged in democratic activities. However, there should be a clause which says if this actually doesn't happen, then there should be very strong and not bureaucratic remedies that which students can engage with, and these remedies should be meaningful and effective in reducing the amount of problems in schools, whether it be on an institutional level or on a state level.
Just in defense of art, we were joking, it only of just that. So I think art can even come first if there are some examples of non-formal education for two reasons. One is the joke that it comes in alphabetical order, the first silly joke. But the serious thing is that I think that the narratives which are sort of fundamental parts of the environment of education and human rights and citizenship are really, really important, and I think that artistic activities, participatory artistic activities, can help a lot to produce and create narrative understandings of political communities and cooperation in those political communities. So for that reason, I think it can come even first, because we understand our situations, students, teachers, whoever, whatever role we are in at a certain moment, we understand those situations and our rights and acceptable, non-acceptable restrictions or self-restraint on our rights based on some certain basic narratives. And I think that, so for that reason, art is key. But I agree with the other additions too, for the non-formal education part.
Yeah, I'm still stuck with my question: who are we addressing? Because I think this is what we should start from. Because otherwise, we can, create an ideal world where all the legal powers are addressed, all the students, teachers, and all the D4 countries and whatever.
Yeah, the original idea was the decision-making bodies, so authorities, national authorities. But we can, we can broaden it. It is also included in the preamble. Yeah, but we can, we can address it also to decision-making bodies at the school level. So
actually, I think it is written there before those principles.
Yeah, before the principles.
It says that it should be implemented, these principles, by all state institutions, schools, and civil society actors in the field. So the only actor we left out, at least as I follow, I mean, maybe we left out, because if youth organizations can be considered civil society actors as well, then we only left out international organizations, which we might actually put in, because we also heard in the previous panel that also international organizations, of course, can have some improvements in this segment.
Any other ideas? Yes.
Very stylistical comment. Could we transfer the second bullet point, non-formal education, rather towards the end? Because I think it would fit better there. Like to start with the discussion about what formal education should indeed be expected to do, how it should be transformed in terms of goals, tools to allow for its evolution, new teaching methodologies, and only at a later stage how non-formal actors can actually be supported, allowed to interact, etc.
I have one more addition to the part, democracy in educational institutions. But can I jump there, or that it's or it can be included elsewhere too, but it's about tradition that I mentioned earlier. So at the end of the text on democracy in educational institutions, I thought a short addition can be related traditions or supportive traditions should be highlighted. So something like what I mean here, that often these values and attitudes we are going to support here are often taken as, okay, these are the liberal or constitutional democracy ideas, and those who may disagree with these ideas come that, yes, but this is the tradition of our country, and then it can be a losing side to argue for these values. So it's very, I don't mean to repeat myself long, just it seems it's important to put behind examples from our traditions, even if some people may try to reject them, saying that, okay, but those schools where democracy was practiced in the school long ago already in all countries, those were exceptional. In most schools there was no such a thing. Let's highlight the positive examples, I suggest, and build on that and be proud of those examples and claim them as old tradition. And about the wording, I wonder that perhaps there are so many good and creative ideas that do you think you can incorporate them now or maybe later? It's already, you are putting it in.
Oh yeah, Max is for that.
Yeah, great.
Any other ideas about this formal education, non-formal education, methodology? I just give you a definition. It's the Council of Europe definition that they use. Formal education is defined as the structured education and training system that runs from pre-primary and primary through secondary school and on to university. As a rule, it takes place at general and vocational educational institutions and leads to certification, whereas non-formal education is everything else, any planned program of education outside the formal education, designed to improve a range of skills and competencies. For example, youth work. Is it fine to you? So any other non-formal education that is designed to improve a range of skills and competencies, for example, youth work. It is also called non-formal learning, if it's good for you. Yeah, any ideas?
Just a bit confusing because you use wording that that non-formal education there should be enough space created in the curricula for developing non-formal education activities. So now we like mix up two concepts. So formal, non-formal, curricula, extracurricular. So we should somehow clarify this relationship between these two.
There, was that the curricula should give a couple of hours, for instance, which are not specified. It's not written what exactly needs to be covered in those classes, but it should be given as opportunity for informal education initiatives. So, for instance, some students having some workshop, or some NGOs coming and holding a workshop or some other form of activity within the class, because I think it was mentioned at some point in the previous panels that curricula usually do not allow time for these activities, and then teachers don't want to lose their classes. There is no time, and therefore, of course, students don't want to stay after school, and then there is no time for these non-formal educational activities. So I think that was the idea, but maybe still some clarification can be useful of this.
I announced that we proceed to the last 10 minutes, so maybe we should go to the most crucial points, which is inclusive setting in the education process and democracy in educational institutions. Do you have any ideas or remarks or good practices that you saw and you would like to put in or add to those paragraphs?
Were we done with the role of teachers, or did we have to save a couple of minutes for
We
that?
can, yeah. So do you have a concrete proposal for that? Maybe later. Yeah.
Can you please repeat it again?
Sure. Just the one of the two last paragraphs is inclusive setting in the educational process and democracy in education institutions.
Meanwhile, I might highlight this point of Professor Matej, who mentioned in the morning that we should not use slashes in the memorandum. And actually that has a conceptual element as well, as I think, because there was this discussion in the later morning panel that democratic citizenship education might sound exclusionary actually towards those who are non-citizens, so for instance the refugee children. So in this sense, I would actually be in favor, at least for the purpose of this memorandum, to use only human rights education. So no democratic citizenship, no European values, because that is actually included, or can be seen as being included in human rights education. So that would be the overreaching concept, and then the others would be included. And even environmental education, sustainability. So then we are not limiting ourselves to maybe some types of rights more than other rights, which would be part of this human rights education.
But however, this memorandum is addressed to national ministries and institutions, so I don't think that refugees can be dealt with by those institutions.
Oh yes, they are. Sorry, they are, because refugees in all European countries are considered, after they receive the status as refugees, are considered like citizens.
So was there point connected to asylum seekers, or
no? Asylum seeker is different. So the moment when a migrant enters the country and comes from a war-torn society, is applying for asylum, and if his or her request is accepted, then he becomes a refugee. And after he becomes or she becomes a refugee, then it's considered that it has the same rights and obligation as a citizen of that country.
True.
So
I don't know if the point made this morning with regards to refugees was actually a remark for international organizations to deal with asylum seekers before they receive their refugee status. I don't know. Because indeed, if after one receives this refugee status and the state should take care of them too, as if they were citizens, then I don't see the need for specifying that if we are already calling for inclusiveness. Shouldn't it come automatically?
It's not citizenship as a legal concept. So if someone reads, and I think the comment pointed out that in some cases someone might read actually citizenship in this case as a legal concept, which within national law often is exclusionary. So even if someone is granted a refugee status in a country, he or she is not a citizen. There have to be several years until the person can apply for citizenship.
They also not have this formulation citizenship into this document because the asylum procedure might take several months or even up to a year. And basically we have to be as inclusive as possible because there will be politicians or even people that are in far-right movements, and they most likely will say that the state is only obliged to follow this regulation for its citizens. So we should protect all the categories, including asylums or refugees. So I don't know.
Maybe I don't understand, but why shouldn't an asylum seeker want to receive democratic citizenship education?
No, I think it was the same question that we discussed with Eszter. I think the problem arose that those asylum seekers and refugees who are still in camps, they do not benefit from the normal curriculum, which, as told, once they get some status, they receive the same curriculum with the democratic citizenship education. So normally, anyone who has at least here in Europe, anyone who has some status like asylum seeker or refugee benefit from the normal curriculum of citizens. Any idea about that? Or any new comments about democratic environment in educational institutions? Would you add anything else?
I would add just that thanks for putting in the positive examples and practices. So I would add, I suggest to add past and present positive examples. So somehow to highlight that historic examples are also important, because generally when it's positive or best practices are mentioned, past and present, something like that, then generally it means like ongoing positive examples. Then again, we wouldn't rely on positive examples from the past. Yeah. I would even use the word tradition somehow if we find a way. Just to claim the tradition for progressive purposes. I think it's really important. Past and present for positive. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, Diana, please.
Here I would also add that in my opinion it would be important for these new tools discovered and experimented in schools to be somehow assessed. Maybe by peer review, not necessarily by a higher educational institution, but to have a certain means of seeing if they have positive and negative effects on the medium and long term.
Here we go back to Andrea's invitation to refer to the data and research in educational policies.
And also to using digital tools maybe. Also for implementing this non-formal education methods, not only for assessment.
Would you put digital tools in the non-formal education? Yeah.
I think non-formal education is highly dependent on digital tools, and it cannot be effective without, up to a certain point, of course, in rural areas, because we mentioned this topic earlier today. It is dependent also on paperback means, but normally it shouldn't be.
But on the same time, wouldn't this reference to digital tools would give leverage to principals and schools not to implement actually education for human rights. They would say, we don't have these digital tools, so we are not enforced, and we could have education for human rights without these digital tools.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the perfect way, but at least you can.
You are right.
Yeah.
They can easily excuse like
Yeah.
we don't have the capacity to.
And I imagine a situation like this in Romania. I don't know in other countries, but in Romania I can imagine.
Maybe where possible.
Yeah.
Some other.
Can I ask by digital tools, what do you mean? Like using a presentation, PowerPoint presentation or video?
That would be really basic, but when it comes to design, creating a film, for example, an anti-discrimination film, because you can easily think of a project to divide a school, a class of children in 3 or 4 groups to make a film. You already need not only filming equipment, but also editing skills. You need to know afterwards how to cross-post it on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all at the same time. And already this requires a teacher who is aware and capable of fostering this, so that the children will feel empowered and engaged to continue using non-formal education.
And what about these ideas, like, shouldn't there be like some kind of list of methods that the teacher can use? Like, for example, you have a curriculum, so you have a list of topics. And what if someone made like some kind of handbook for teachers? Like, for example, you have this topic, and for example, you can use these activities. Because I studied citizenship education, but we only had like 2 semesters of teaching methods, so it wasn't enough. And now if I want to teach something, I have to look everything up on my own, and I don't really have the time.
That's
what you said, the compass.
And the other methods.
Yeah, I noticed that there are some methods, but regular. For example, if I don't have that, or if I don't speak English, what should I do? Like,
as Alexandra mentioned, yes, it's.
But I do. But if I am a teacher, for example, not a teacher who doesn't speak English or something, why isn't there like a methodology for every teacher? You know, like methodology available for every teacher.
You know, the compass is translated to each and every languages of the Council of Europe.
Yes, but for example, I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
And I'm
so
a
it's not well known as it was.
You're too young.
And it's available online. It's really easily available online. You just need even using words without knowing that the compass exists. If you want to, let's say, I Google take a step forward exercise, and it was the compass exercise I found.
Yes, so you're saying that the teacher has to be really active and to try to look for resources on his own, and then he or she can discover, for example, these methods. So why isn't it like, I don't know, somehow provided for a teacher automatically?
The problem maybe it could be provided by some central institutions, because because now you have to give your free time to study the compass, and I think there is very few teachers who will do it
by themselves, without being overwhelmed by their already existing.
That could be problem.
In this case, we could formulate like core documents and best practice examples included in the compass, for example, and the other manuals, to be shared with the teachers and also including in training programs.
The universities have to use publications like this to teach teachers how to teach.
Training of trainers.
Yeah.
Maybe another idea from Eszter that was also mentioned yesterday, that a key element is how we form teachers. So in the higher education of future teachers, how we integrate all these elements, non-formal and formal.
Good luck with that.
But if we make a strong argument that it could be also reflected.
Fontos elmondani szerintem, hogy tehát jelenleg a történelem és állampolgári ismeretek osztatlan tanárképzés van.
So
Tehát a
nowadays
történelem
in
és az
Hungary,
állampolgári ismeret fej mellett van a megnevezésben.
yeah, now in Hungary you have one unique formation, undivided, which is history and citizenship education. You cannot choose any other subject. These two are between each, so among each other.
Ennek ellenére ebben a történelemképzés a lényegi, igen, a domináns, és itt kellene valamit a szemléletre.
Nevertheless, it is highly history focused, and this should be changed, as it was also said yesterday.
I think this is a very, very sensitive issue since we are going into national legislation for each state. So in Romania, basically to form a teacher, you might have a half-year pedagogical education, but also there might be implemented a mandatory master program on forming teachers. So I would recommend to have it a little bit vague in this memorandum, and afterwards to just put pressure on national stakeholders to implement it in the way it is possible, because we cannot have a sentence that will encompass the entire or all 4 legislations. So maybe we should adapt this part of how to train teachers for human rights education a little bit vague. I mean clear, but not necessarily pointing out directly how to do it, and then work specifically with each country and just address the issues, adapt to national legislations, come up with policy, because otherwise it will be a lot of critiques. We cannot generalize for all 4 countries.
So in this case, could we agree? I mean, I tried to formulate something like what is there now. So there should be a specialization on human rights education during university studies. I think in Slovakia there is such an option, or at least you can have like a dual program. I think one of them being human rights education. Maybe I'm mistaken, but as we heard, so it is not the case in Hungary, which seems to be a problem. For the possibility to specialize for future teachers. So for me, it wouldn't be too strong to have it in this memorandum, but I mean, of course, we can discuss.
Not human rights education, Max, but civic education. It's a very much broader concept.
If there is no other comments, then we can suspend the discussion, not close together, because we will certainly circulate this draft memorandum to you and to your organizations, to your schools. So you are very welcome to comment it even afterwards. We will adopt it online, I hope. But then for this discussion, I very appreciate your comments and questions. Thank you so much, and I give the floor to Professor Molnár to some closing remarks.
Thank you, Antal, and thank you for the good discussion. So I just try to be short, long day, and I thought that what I share is that sort of like a personal experience. I am from a generation for which 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, end of the communist dictatorship in the countries in this region, was really a formative experience, and I remember that in those days when I was involved at the end of the 80s and then from the beginning of the 90s and throughout the 90s as a member of parliament in shaping a new system, there was really this hope, and it was more than a hope, it looked like totally like reality that 89 was like such a cathartic change, and people after the decades of suppression really wanted, so not only it looked like not only some intellectuals or activists, but sort of like generally societies wanted freedom. And then of course came to the all sorts of challenges that what it means and how it can work with all sorts of policy issues. So what I wanted to recall specifically, that in that moment, at the end of the 80s and early 90s, I thought that, and with others we thought that, okay, we need to change the institutions. We need to create the institutions for representative democracy, and that's basic. But we also thought that, and I should mention perhaps that I was doing it like a founding member and member of the leadership of that time Fidesz, which is the current governing party of Hungary with a slightly different agenda. And I don't call it Fidesz, by the way, for this slight difference. And so what we had in mind, that we thought that we really need to inspire changing the way, also the way people think and reflect on the relevant issues. And I am very conscious about not putting it in a way we thought we need to change the minds, because all people are individual free agents. They have agency, they can decide. I'm afraid probably they can still decide that, okay, if someone says, I want to be racist, in a sense, maybe that person wouldn't say it that way, but would say that I want around me only people who are similar to me. It's not so easy to argue that that person doesn't have the right to think this stupid and not nice way. But so the way I put it, that we wanted to inspire people to change their mind themselves with their independence of thought and talking. And so we created all sorts of things. We created something was called Orange Foundation. We had orange clubs around Hungary, from villages to Budapest, and so we were working on it. So we were trying to fill up the institutions with changes in the fabric of the society. And as we all know the story, although for most of you, those days around 89 that I mentioned are sort of more like history. I mean, it's history now for all of us, but so you didn't live through it. But so as we all know, for a while it looked like it was working better. And then, especially in my own country, Hungary, it somehow, in a very strange way, it started to go wrong, and this is what I think brings us back to the issue: how can these educational activities, this really nice and helpful gathering is about, can help us to understand how can we create a much stronger understanding of citizenship in our political communities and cooperation and taking human rights seriously. How can we somehow do that? How can we inspire people? How can we translate the importance of these issues to those who are not among those who already agree with us? So it's like not only preaching for the choir, but also reaching others as well. And this is where I believe, again, that artistic activities are important. Once I saw in New York a performance, and it was a love story, and an African-American lesbian writer, actor was moderating the talk back afterwards. And she told the people who stayed for the talk that, okay, so you thought you came for a love story and you find yourself in discussion about structural racism. And I think in a way that's what we need to do. Let's pull in people with a love story and then engage with them in discussion about human rights and citizenship. And I do think that in the end we will overcome, although sometimes these days look not that encouraging. But this event was really inspiring and encouraging. So I thank again Antal and Max and others who helped to organize it very much for doing it, and also for inviting me, and good luck with the continuation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.